Hello, my name is Gary Collins and I've written a few books. Most of you may know that already. Welcome to the part. And by that I mean I look around me and I can see all the books that I have written, and they have been placed in shadow boxes, not by me, by my niece Janine. And the last time she put one up, the last book, she reminded me that I would have to get a bigger wall, to which I said, well, maybe I'll stop writing. And no, I'm not going to do that, because as I speak, my 15th manuscript is on the computer. I won't explain all of the book, just the title a bit. As a young man, the place that we lived in was never called a town or a community. Frequently, it would be called a settlement, but never a town. So the place that I lived in, and still live in, is Hare Bay on the north side of Suvla Bay. And this particular place, the story is based on an island. Could be from anywhere from Nain to Lawn on this island. But in my mind, it's a place that I know very well, Bragg's Island. The island could, like I said, it could just as well be Miramichi Island or Fogo or St. Brendan's. I won't explain very much to you, because I think what I'm going to read is pretty much self-explanatory. Just to tell you that this entire book, from cover to cover, takes place in the late 1800s and up to and including the First World War of 1914 to 18. All you need to know about the little section I'm going to read is that I'm reading in the first person singular as a woman, which was not easy to do, but it became easier with all the questions that I asked my wife Rose. And before I begin, I can tell you that my desk is not usually this tidy. Rose took care of that too. So the time I'm reading about is midnight, 1899. And my character, Becky, has just given birth to a baby boy. All you really need to know is that, and this is important, Becky's hair is black, and her husband, Toby's hair, likewise, is coal black. That's important to remember. You'll have a bonny-looking boy, Aunt Jane, the midwife, told me. She was holding a bundle of screams, his face cowled and swaddled with blankets in her arms. I saw my boy's face for the first time then. Red as a bald beet he was. His wide open mouth exposed toothless gums and exuded cries. Bubbling tears chased down his flushed cheeks, his eyes barred tight. His two hands were knuckled into tiny fists, and he kicked in protest. Bury your breast, my love, so as he can feed, Aunt Jane said gently, seeing as how I didn't have the sense to do so. I pulled back the blanket, which was damp with the sweat of my ordeal, and exposed my swollen left breast. Aunt Jane tenderly placed the child down in the crook of my shoulder and directed his screaming mouth. The baby fastened his lips, and it gave me a jolt of surprise. The boy's mouth was warm and soothing. The feeling was one of intense relief to my swollen breast. He stopped crying. Gunfire erupted outside. I saw the stabs of flames flicker against the window pane. The boys were firing off their muskets to announce the new year of 1900. Aunt Jane stood watching by the window. Waste of powder and shot, she said to herself. The guns stopped as quickly as they had begun. The door creaked open and Toby entered. His face beamed as he crossed the floor to see his son. The path of light from the lamp was disturbed briefly when he crossed it. Then his shadow fell upon the child at my breast. Ashamed to let him see my nakedness under the glow of the lamp, I pulled the blanket over, hiding the peacefully nursing child. Show me my boy, he ordered, bending over the better to see. I caught the faint smell of moonshine on his breath. The new century had been drunk in, too. Noticing his shadow upon the child's form, he moved aside to let in some lamplight. I covered my breasts with the inner blanket and pulled the child's blanket aside. Even damp from birth sweat, his hair still looked flaming red. The smile left Toby's face and was replaced by a scowl that thrust daggers into my eyes. God had not answered my simple prayer. My molester's hair color had been manifested in his child. I was mortified. Toby left the room, his shadow a fleeting thing across the path of lamplight. The door slammed behind him, and the silence in the room was pronounced. I was now confronted by a harsh reality. Just then I missed my mother's presence. She, who had flitted back and forth from kitchen to my room all day, had not entered the room since the birthing. I knew why then. She had helped Aunt Jane with the birth. Both of them had seen the color of my child's hair and knew what Toby would be thinking. As if reading my mind and seeing my distress, Aunt Jane came to me. "'Twas the hard birthing, my love. I've seen it all afore. No call for alarm or misjudgments." She looked toward the door through which Toby had stormed. The color of the boy's hair was surely changed. Aunt Jane was right. In a short time the boy's hair did turn. It turned as bright as the color of fir boughs burning, and the hate that would plague our family and consume my life began. I had my son christened Jacob. Toby didn't care what I called him. Aunt Jane was not only midwife, she was healer and the closest person to a doctor in the place. She was also church lay reader and was authorized to christen babies. The circuit minister came but rarely. His visits depended on schooners, wind, and whim. We from the outports knew all too well the importance of having a child christened as soon as possible. The cemetery bore mute witness to it. So on a Sunday morning, 3 days after Jacob's birth, I lugged him through calf-high snow to Aunt Jane's house on the wind-swept point. She lived alone. The dog chained near her door heard my feet crunch through the January snow long before he saw me and began his mournful howling. He ran the length of his chain as I neared his tail, wagging wildly, hoping I would free him. Jacob was crying as I stepped through Aunt Jane's porch door without knocking, stamped my boots, and entered her warm kitchen. "Feeding time, is it?" She smiled knowingly. "It is forever feeding time with this one. Starving all the time he is." "They all are, my love. Be thankful he is hungry for your milk. And what's more, be grateful the child is keeping it down. The baby girl across the tickle can't keep her milk down, pouring out of the poor child from both ends. We even tried another mother's milk. Nothing works. Poor child. Baptized her yesterday, I did. 1 week old. I doubt she'll see the end of another week. Susie, they named her. My God, I thought, I can't tell Aunt Jane I wouldn't mind if my son died. Well, it wasn't really that, though. I didn't wish he were dead. I just wish he weren't here with me." Aunt Jane interrupted my disturbing thoughts. "Come along to the table, my love. They're rowing a punt across the tickle for me in an hour or so. Not that I know what to do for the poor child. Still, I'll be shoving across the tickle when it comes. I'm permitted to perform the other ceremony too, God forbid." "The other ceremony?" "Interment, my love." She poured well water, brown and rich in iron, from a jug with bluebirds flying all over it, into a large earthen bowl painted with bluebirds nesting. A large open Bible rested beside the bowl. She took Jacob from my breast and stepped to the table. I buttoned my clothes and stood beside her. "Toby?" Aunt Jane looked to the door. "Not coming. They never do. Keen on the getting and never the fitting, I always say about him." The dog started barking again. Aunt Jane went to the window with Jacob in her arms. "The boys are rowing across the tickle already," she said. "Poor little Susie must have taken a turn for the worst. We must hurry." Aunt Jane stepped briskly back to the table and said, without reading, "May happiness be yours all the years in front of you. May happiness be your portion always. May love be your constant friend. May God's grace and blessing be upon your shoulders all the days of your life. I christen thee." She looked at me. "Jacob," I said. With her cupped hand, she sprinkled water over Jacob's head. He frowned and screwed up his face, but the boy didn't cry. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, I christen thee, Jacob." The door opened, and a man with a ruddy face and dressed in a heavy coat entered with snow-covered boots. "'Tis Susie again, Aunt Jane. Drained of her colour she is, and breathing no more than a sparrow. There's slob making in a tickle. You must come along quick like." "Amen," said Aunt Jane, and she handed me my son, who started crying. "Probably needs feeding," said the man. "Close the door when you leave, Becky, my love," Aunt Jane said, already pulling on her coat and holding a scarf over her head. She left with the man. When I was leaving Aunt Jane's steps, the chained dog ran toward me again, pleading with his eyes to be released. The chain was secured to a wide fastened belt around his neck. The dog stood still while I unbuckled the belt, and then he bolted. "You are free," I shouted after him. "At least for a while. I will never be free." Little Susie died while Aunt Jane was still crossing the tickle. So that's a small section of one of the characters I've written about in my book, The Place. I will end it there. I would just say that if you're at home now, that I hope everything is well for you, and there are some people that I would wish to thank. My wife Rose and I have several members of our family who are nurses on this island and on the mainland, and I wish to express to them my profuse thanks. And also our leaders who come daily into our homes and express their so much empathy and with such calmness. I can assure all of you, it is an assurance to hear you. So from the town of Hare Bay on the north side of Bonavista Bay, I would like to say from all of us a dory load of thanks. And as my mother used to say to me when I did anything was special when I was a boy, God love your hearts. And thank you very much.